To discuss the Pope's encyclical and the Synod, we are joined now from Rome by Francis Rocca, Senior Vatican Analyst for EWTN News. Frank, thank you for being here. How significant are encyclicals? St. John Paul II wrote 14 of them, Pope Emeritus Benedict wrote 3, and Pope Francis has also written now 4.
Well, they're considered the most authoritative form of papal writing. They don't always have the most impact or make the most news. Laudato Si is Francis's most famous, certainly, in which he talked about the protection of creation, of the environment. But they are meant to be read by everyone and often addressed to the whole world, not just the Catholic Church.
Right. If we think about the dominion of a bishop, he's in charge of all of the souls in his diocese, not just those that are baptized Catholic. Well, Archbishop Bruno Forte says this encyclical is the key to understanding Pope Francis's pontificate. What are the biggest takeaways from Dilexit Nos?
Well, I think one thing that's interesting about it is that it's certainly focused on the devotion to the Sacred Heart, which is a devotion we associate particularly with St. Margaret Mary Alacoque. 350 years ago in France, experienced these apparitions of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. But it's also has relevance to contemporary society and speaks to people in general, I think even non-Catholics, talking about the need to connect our hearts to the challenges of modern society. And he talks about, I think, as you mentioned, consumerism and technology as being threats to that. He talks particularly about technology fragmenting our relationships. And he says, about artificial intelligence, he says no algorithm can capture the nostalgia. And he gives a very literary example about remembering his mother and grandmother making these empanadillas, these pies, and using he was helping making with the fork. And so he gets very intimate and wants to talk about the technology can't capture this. So it's about returning to the heart so that we can restore balance in our lives and our relationships, and also service to others, which of course is a key theme for Pope Francis always.
Yeah, it certainly felt like a call to all Christians to return to just having a real relationship, a physical relationship with Jesus Christ. Well, I do want to move on to the Synod on Synodality. How significant then is it that Pope Francis chose to ratify this final document right away rather than release his own synthesis and reflections?
Well, he, of course, amended canon law to enable him to do that, and so he set the stage for that. Yes, usually he would take this as input and then write his own document. In this case, he said, no, this is we have enough. So I think it's a strong gesture toward including consulting the laity who are a part of this synod, unusually, uniquely in the history of the synod. In the last year, he added lay people, including women. And I think it's a gesture toward that. We should note, of course, it's not, as our colleague Matthew Bunson has pointed out, it's not a normative document. It doesn't have rules. It doesn't have regulations. It's more of a pastoral document. It's more advisory. So let's say the stakes are lower. But he's saying, yeah, I hear you, and this is the direction we want to go in.
And it does have significant advice, as you say, for bishops to apply at the local level. Well, these synod sessions have been the first to, as you mentioned, invite delegates beyond the traditional assembly of bishops, including lay people. Bishop Robert Barron recently told EWTN News the following. Let's listen.
The wider consultation with the laity so they can be more involved in the decision-making process of the church. That's a basic concern of synodality, that we listen more fully, more widely, especially to voices often marginalized. That's a big part of it.
Did including lay people in this synod process have a significant impact? Were the discussions different because of them?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, the language of the document is perhaps less ecclesial, maybe, and at least in tone than we might have seen in previous documents of its kind, a little bit less technical. Or if it was technical, it used a language that's become more current in current discussions in which lay people and activists have been involved. I mean, I think it's important to remember that the Pope has the last word always. He doesn't have to take this advice. He doesn't have to act in any particular way. So it's not as if, at least in this case, he's ceding authority. The bishops are losing authority, magisterial authority. But it is a strong statement that the lay people have to be consulted, and certainly sets a precedent that you will think other future popes and other bishops will follow.
An important one. Well, this question of women deacons has been one of the closely watched issues from outside the synod halls. It's making a lot of people nervous. The final document says the issue remains open. 27% of delegates voted against this paragraph. What did this pushback look like?
Well, I mean, there seems to be anxiety about the lack of clarity. I mean, the statement itself says that it talks about the question of women's access to the diaconate or to the diaconal ministry. That doesn't necessarily mean ordination. And we know that the Pope said in the spring, he told CBS television, no, holy orders, no. Women can be deaconesses, maybe, that there is a precedent for that in the history of the church, but they can't be ordained. But however, Cardinal Fernandez, the head of the doctrinal office, said at the beginning of this fall synod, he said, well, we don't have enough to decide that right now. So he seemed to allow this statement doesn't resolve that ambiguity. And I think there must be some anxiety on the part of some of the delegates that, like, oh my gosh, are we opening the door and saying, yeah, maybe they can be ordained after all, which is perplexing to some because since the Pope seems to have said, or did say, that that's not possible.
Right. A lot of contradictory statements there and something important to watch. Well, what comes next, Frank? You recently wrote in the National Catholic Register that the Synod will have an epilogue in these study groups that will be examining these controversial issues and reporting in over the summer. What comes next?
Well, that's right. They have to give their conclusions to the Pope, and so even though he says he's not going to write an apostolic exhortation, based on this synod, he can certainly act on any of those recommendations or choose to study them further, and that includes the question of women in ministry. It also potentially includes LGBT issues, contraception, other controversial issues that were expected to be addressed at the synod and did come up. So that's a big step. We'll have to see where the Pope goes with that.
Yeah, well, we'll be watching it very closely and relying on you for that too. Thank you so much, Frank.
Thank you.